Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and this is my October reading wrap-up. And I had kind of a meh reading month this month. I did read 4 books, but 3 of them were 3-star books and 1 was a DNF. So, jumping right in, I started with The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm by Christopher Paolini. And I was super excited for this one because it was our first new content in Allegasia in many years, but then it was kind of a bit of a disappointment. I really thought this was going to be short stories that were like old tales of Allegasia, like old lore, like almost kind of like fairy tales. Like, I thought it would read a little bit like the tales of Beedle the Bard from the Harry Potter series, but it was really more so just short stories, kind of just showing what our characters are up to nowadays. Which, it's nice to know what they're up to nowadays, but none of the stories were like super engaging or super interesting. It definitely was a slow start for me, and the stories felt a little bit pointless in a way. The first story did have one great twist, which this is going to be spoilery for the first story, The Fork. So when the story begins on The Fork, it seems like it's something that is taking place in the past, and our main character is Tornik, Murtaugh's old mentor, which was kind of exciting. I was interested to learn more about him, but then there's a great twist in which actually this story is about Murtaugh, and he's just using his old mentor's name to hide his identity. So that was really exciting and a great twist, but other than that, the story was just kind of meh for me. Again, I was just kind of wondering what the point of the story was. There was some mystery being built up about some powerful items that Murtaugh seems to be looking for, which would be intrigued to know what they are and where that story is going. But it was such a short story that it was more like just an introduction to a mystery with no follow-through. So perhaps we'll get more information in the later volumes. We have more volumes of short stories coming out later. But honestly, these were disappointing enough that I don't know if I'm interested in buying more volumes or not. I might wait for them to come out on paperback. I don't know. And so then the second story was something that I knew we would be getting in this book, and that was a story about Angela the Witch, which I was super excited for. And the second story was written by Christopher Paolini's sister, Angela Paolini. She is the namesake for the character. And I liked her writing style. There was interesting information in this story, and it felt more relevant. It felt more like what I was expecting, but it still just wasn't very exciting. And then the third story, The Worm, is actually the one I ended up liking the best, and it was the closest to what I thought these stories would be. It was an Urgle telling an old folk legend that all Urgle children hear. I liked the setup for this story the best. It had the most exciting setup. And yeah, it was just the most engaging one for me. But that being said, it was very long. It felt like it could have been a little bit shorter. I liked learning more about the Razak in this story and more about how they interact with Urgles. And yeah, overall this one was just the most interesting for me. It was a nice way to end the stories, and the wrap-up was also great. So yeah, overall this isn't as good as I hoped it would be. It was only 3 stars for me. And I'm not sure about the later volumes. Honestly, I'll probably get them because it's more Inheritance Cycle content, but it just wasn't quite everything that I hoped for. Next, I read They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. I was very excited for this one going into it. I thought that it could potentially be a 5-star book, which is probably not a good thing. I probably need to stop having expectations going into books, because then it sort of just messes with the reading experience. It couldn't quite live up to those expectations. I didn't love the setup, and it just took me a long time to get into this one. It was a slow start for sure. I definitely connected more with the character Mateo than Rufus. Mateo was a little more shy, and actually at the back of the book there was some extra content, including like an interview with Adam Silvera, and he was saying how Mateo is very much got the same personality as him and much more based on himself than Rufus is, and I feel like that kind of reads through in the characters. Mateo felt very fleshed out and real, and Rufus, some of his dialogue just seemed off, and he just didn't seem as well fleshed out, and so I definitely connected with Mateo more, both on me having a more similar personality to him, and also I think the writing for his character was better. So it was slow to start, but part 1 did wrap up nicely, but then it got slow again in part 2, and it finally really started to pick up in part 3 when all of the mini storylines that are going on started to come together, which I always find exciting in books when there are disconnected things that you later find out are actually connected. It's always a fun little discovery. At times the message felt a little heavy-handed to me, and at other times some of the thought process of the characters didn't really make sense to me. Like, you know, people are like saying don't skydive on your end day because that's dangerous for someone who's going to be dying today. But I just don't get that. Like, why not skydive on your last day? Even if that's what kills you, it's your last day anyways, so go do the exciting thing. And apparently some people find it weird that the title is a big spoiler, but I don't know, I feel like knowing that they both died at the end, first of all, it's established very early in the story, so you don't get very far into the story before you figure this out, that they're both dying at the end. And second of all, to me it actually kind of built anticipation throughout the story, especially more so towards the end of the story, because several things happen that could be the thing that kills them. And so each time you're like, oh, it's happening, and then it doesn't, and so I think it builds anticipation. And then I did actually really like the ending. I liked the deaths. I feel like they weren't predictable, but they were like very normal, everyday sort of deaths in a way, which I think was kind of nice, that they weren't like some extraordinary heroic deaths or anything like that. They were just life, you know? Or rather death. And I really loved the final line of the book, which I will go ahead and read if you've read it and forgotten. But if you haven't read it, then don't listen. But yes, the final line is, I crossed the street without an arm to hold me back, which is just a nice, ambiguous, you know what happened, and yet it's not, you know, actually said or written out. So I gave this one 3 stars, but I do honestly think I might enjoy a reread better because I'll be going into it without all the high expectations that I did the first time around. After that, I read In the Unlikely Event by Judy Blume. And I was really sad about this one because this was my first Judy Blume book, and I did not finish it. It had such a slow start and so many characters that I feel like we just got a very shallow look at them because there were so many and they had such short little time spent in their perspective. And honestly, the book felt kind of dated in a way. Like, it was written, I believe, in 2015 or published in 2015, but I don't know, it felt like a book from like the 80s or something, which I know part of that is that it is a historical fiction and it actually takes place in the 50s, but I don't know, for some reason it felt kind of 80s to me in a way. And yeah, just kind of the whole vibe just wasn't really working for me. I didn't really enjoy part 1, and I was going to have that as like my decision to keep reading or not keep reading, and I think I read just a little bit past that. It for a second got kind of interesting, but then went right back to being boring. And yeah, eventually I looked up a synopsis because I'm really bad about wanting to know how a book ends, even if I'm not enjoying it. So I looked up a synopsis and I like started reading just kind of a little bit past where I was, just to see if it sounded like it was going to get very interesting. And I ended up reading the whole synopsis, and the entire thing made me go, this doesn't sound like it gets better. There was for sure like too much happening and also not enough. Like, there were so many characters and so many storylines going on and so much to follow, but none of it was very interesting. And like, strangely, all of it was like lots of different storylines, but also nothing really happening in those storylines, or nothing exciting, I guess. So yeah, I made it to a page 168 and that's where I gave up. Weird random thing that kind of made me want to keep going for a while there was, this is a very strange thing, but the main character's name was Miri, which is not a name that I see a lot, but it is the main character from Princess Academy, which is a book and a character that I love. So I really like the name Miri and that I wanted to like that character. So weird random thing. So yeah, unfortunately my first Judy Blume book was a DNF. And after that I read The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, which this one was a reread, and on this reread I was wanting to decide whether or not to continue the series. I did not love this book the first time I read it. I think I found it a little bit boring the first time I read it, and I was left very unsure of whether or not I wanted to continue the series. I did give it 3 stars, so I enjoyed it well enough, but I wasn't super excited for it. And so yes, that was the decision I was going into this book having to make. It's definitely a perfectly acceptable book. It is a retelling of the Grimm fairy tale, The Goose Girl, and on some levels I do kind of connect with the main character. She's pretty shy, doesn't interact well with people really. She talks about her thoughts being kind of chased away by her nervousness, which is a familiar feeling to me. But yeah, the book in places feels a little bit predictable, although, spoiler alert, her guard turning out to be alive in the end was a good twist that I did not see coming, and also the final sequence, even upon reread, I don't think I remembered these. In the final sequence when the prince is secretly listening behind the tapestry also was a good twist that I did not even remember happening. But yeah, sometimes the book reads very middle grade, and then other times it goes kind of dark and like kind of weirdly dark, like the horse's head hanging on the wall and all that. So the tone is a little bit inconsistent in this book, but there are also very light, fun, funny moments in the book, like Annie interacting with her geese is always nice, and the relationship with Garrick is good. And I put my goal to make my decision on whether or not to continue the series at about halfway through the book, because I was gonna order it online and I needed time for it to come in the mail, which I just finished it yesterday and it hasn't come in the mail yet, so hopefully soon. In the meantime, I'm gonna read the Grimm fairy tale, The Goose Girl, and some H.P. Lovecraft. But yeah, so I did decide to continue the series, which was a very tough decision. It helps that the books now have new covers that are really gorgeous. So I'm hoping the series at least maintains its current level of enjoyment for me, or maybe hopefully even gets a little bit better. That would be nice. So I'll be talking about the second book in next month's wrap-up, although I think that I'm probably then going to take another fairly long break from the series and then do a final kind of reread and do the entire series probably maybe sometime next year and do all 4 books. But for now I'm thinking I'm just going to do the first 2. And I could potentially decide after the second one to actually quit the series. We shall see. But yeah, so very mixed bag with this book. The ending felt a little too easy, a little too happy for me. And yeah, just there were parts that I liked, parts that were I didn't love. Nothing that I hated though. And just overall, I don't know, mixed bag of feelings on this book. So yeah, these are the 4 books that I read during October. Kind of a meh reading month for me. Hopefully next month is a little better. I'll be doing the sequel to The Goose Girl. Hopefully I enjoy that one even a little more than The Goose Girl. And I'm also planning to finish the Zeros trilogy by Scott Westerfeld next month. Let me know down below what you've been reading in October. Have you read any spooky books for October? Thanks for watching. Remember, words matter.